So I'd like to welcome everyone to our Amen Bible study. The last time we met, it was in person, although I was not there. My good friend and our vice president of our Antiochian Men Board, Eric Beard, kind of ran things. And I think it went well because I saw the video and it looked like there was a Bible study happening at St. Ignatius Church. And I heard there was probably about 20 men there. So thank you, Father Stephen, for being flexible and continuing to offer these in person when we can do them. That was on the eve of our fall retreat. We've tried to do these in person when we can, whether it's at or at the beginning of one of our spiritual retreats in our diocese, at our Amen conference and retreat, or at our parish life conferences. So it's nice to be able to mix those in when we have the opportunity. But we're back on Zoom. So as a reminder to everyone, this happens usually on the third Thursday of every month, and this month is no exception to that. So we'll continue tonight with the story of Moses. And Father Stephen DeYoung, thank you as always for your time. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, let's go ahead and pray and get started. O Heavenly King, the comforter of the Spirit of truth, who art in all places and fillest all things, treasury of good things and giver of life, come and dwell in us, cleanse us from every stain, and save our souls, O gracious Lord. Amen. So last time in Franklin, we talked about doing these catch-ups and reviews is interesting because with the life of Moses, of course, we've been skipping a little bit because we're focused on the life of Moses. There was a lot of stuff in Leviticus, for example, that we moved past because it wasn't narrative, let alone narrative involving the life of Moses. And so we've kind of hop skipped. So I could only really review last time. But as a quick catch up, the Israelites are still in the wilderness. They are still wandering their way toward, at this point, moving somewhat directly toward the promised land, toward the land of Canaan. And there was last time yet another sort of crisis in the camp. We've seen a number of these crises. We may see another one tonight, depending on how far we get. Usually they involve the people grumbling against God and against Moses, being dissatisfied with the food they have to eat or the lives they have to live in general, or how everything is going, they feel. They tend to express a desire to want to go back to Egypt, to say that things were better there. Sometimes they even go so far as wanting to kill Moses before they head back there. And they generally complain about Moses and God having led them out there to die. Last time, the episode we talked about was a little bit different than that, in that this time, the grumbling, the challenge, the opposition came from Miriam and Aaron rather than from sort of the broad people. So it was Moses' own family, his sort of right-hand man and his sister who came and were accusing and pointing the finger at him and sort of publicly wondering about whether maybe they should be the ones wielding Moses's authority based on what they perceived as his shortcomings. We saw that was dealt with by God pretty quickly, but that he dealt with it in a way that was aimed not at just punishing people, but at restoration, about bringing about repentance. And so in that context, we talked about God's discipline and repentance and those kind of things. So as we pick up tonight, we're actually going to be on the threshold here in Numbers. We're going to be picking up at the beginning of Numbers chapter 13. We're going to be picking up here in Numbers, and at least it's going to seem, as we begin, that Israel is about ready to enter Canaan, is about ready to enter the promised land, is about ready to arrive at their destination. And they're going to be making preparations as God has told them to go into the land and take possession of it. Spoilers, it's not going to go so swell. And that's, if we've been paying attention as we've been following along with how things have been going, this shouldn't blindside us, right? The people as a whole have not really been faithfully following God or the directions he gives to them through Moses. So unless there are any leftover comments, questions, hurled allegations, tired old tropes that anyone wants to bring up, we'll go ahead and pick up in Numbers chapter 13, verse 1. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a ruler among them." Okay, so step one for getting ready to go in and take possession of the land is sort of doing a survey of it, seeing the way things lay, seeing the way things are set up, the state of things in the land. At this time in history, of course, we're talking about city-states, just politically. So each individual city has a king. Outside of Egypt, that's pretty much the state of affairs everywhere at this point in history. So they are not getting ready to invade a country, right? They're not a group of freed slaves from Egypt getting ready to invade a nation or a country or an empire. There are not the sort of overarching structures that we think of when we hear terms like nation and country. There are these individual cities. They're referred to as city-states because they're a political unit unto themselves. So there's a city, that city has a king, and that king presides over the city and over the surrounding farmland. And then there's usually, and at this point in Canaan, there definitely is sort of a buffer zone between the edge of the farming area of one city and the edge of the farming area of another. When those farming areas start to butt up against each other, that's when you have cities going to war, right? But things are mostly stable in Canaan at this point. And so we're just talking about these individual units. That's going to be important later in Joshua when you read about this. It's not that there's this war, it's that there's an interaction between the people and these individual cities. And not only that, but we think about the Canaanites, right? And they're spoken of as if they're some kind of unit. You could say they're kind of an ethnic unit in the sense that, right, genetically, they all look very similar. Genetically, they're very close, the Canaanites. But they also look very similar and are genetically very close to the Hebrews and to the Moabites and to the Edomites and the Midianites, right? So they aren't sort of a different ethnicity in our modern, they didn't have the concept of ethnicity, but in our modern way of thinking, they're not a different ethnicity or people group or skin tone or anything like that from the Israelites. They also, at this point in history, essentially speak the same language. So at this point in history, Hebrew, which is really a kind of Paleo-Hebrew, what Moses and the Israelites would have been speaking, is a dialect of Old Canaanite. So there are sort of dialectical differences. So the way to think about dialectical differences is like English in the United States, English in Britain, English in Australia, English in New Zealand, right? There are going to be things that people say, there are going to be phrases, there are going to be individual words that are different or that are used differently in those different regions. But if two people from two of those regions come together and they're willing to work at it a little, they can communicate, right? It's not that they can't understand at all what the other person is saying. They just might have to ask a few questions and navigate a few different usages of words. Okay, so this is not fundamentally a different spoken language, and all of the city-states are likewise using different dialectical variations on Old Canaanite. So there's not a linguistic unit, the Canaanites, and a linguistic unit, the Hebrews, either. And we've seen that Israel right now is genetically diverse, right? Israel has people of different skin tones, people from different backgrounds, people from different, including Egyptians and people who look like Ethiopians, but also lots of people who look like different Canaanite and Moabite and Edomite and Midianite groups, all sort of mixed together. So this is not even a kind of ethnic warfare. Now there were, just as on the Israelite side, we have these 12 tribes. We have these tribal units that are composed of a bunch of clans, and those clans are composed of a bunch of extended families. That exists among the Canaanites too. And sometimes, for example, those will include more than one city. Sometimes all the people of one of those tribal groups is centered around one city, if it's a smaller one. Sometimes a group like that will have 2 or 3 cities. So the Philistines, for example, at this point, have 5 main cities, and then they control sort of the land in between. Right. The Philistines are a little different, maybe not the best example for the Canaanites, because the Philistines are actually of what we would call Greek descent. They came from, they're Mycenaeans who relocated there. But even the other people groups of, right, you've got the Phoenicians further north who ethnically and linguistically are basically identical to the Canaanites right now, but they have the cities of Tyre and Sidon as sort of their main hubs in what's now Lebanon. So all of this is to say, this is not sort of, when we hear about these people going to spy out the land, it's not just a question of, oh, what are the defenses? Like there's some kind of border fence or border wall around Canaan, or, you know, what kind of army do they have? Because at this point in history, people don't have standing armies. When a war breaks out, or when the king decides he's going to attack or invade something, then an army is called up. And that army is called up from just men of military age, able-bodied men of military age are just called up and put into service. But they're being asked to go and look at the land, see what cities are there. They can see the defenses of the cities, because individual cities had walls. And what would generally happen if a city was attacked is that the people from the farming areas around the city would be called into the city. They would come into the city would lock its gates. And in most cases, because siege warfare was virtually non-existent at this point in history, to try to batter down the walls or do something like that. In rare cases that people would figure out ways to do that, especially if a city had decrepit walls or there was some obvious flaw. But usually they would just lay siege to a city by camping around it, cutting off supplies, and waiting for the city to surrender because they could no longer continue to hold out. The city, meanwhile, would be trying to outlast the army, because, of course, the army that's camped around the city has to feed its troops, water its troops, feed and water its animals if it has horses, for example, for chariots or for other military use. And eventually that camping army camping in one place is going to kind of exhaust what they can get from the land in that one area. So each side would try to outlast the other. But so before you'd attack and lay siege to a city, you'd want to send someone to check out, like, for example, how many sources of fresh water are there around the outside of the city? And are there sources of fresh water inside the city? Or do they have to bring it in from outside? This would make a huge difference if a siege broke out. What is the land like around the city in terms of how much food could be gotten off of the land there to support the army outside, right? Because if a walled city is in the middle of a desert, it's going to be almost impossible to lay siege to, right? Because the army's not going to be able to supply itself well enough to hold the siege long enough for those in the city to give up. So these men are being sent in to survey all of those issues and to come back. And then at that point, a plan will be laid out for how the Israelites would move into the area, what route they would take, what cities they would move on. And the last little bit is they've also been told by God, remember, that there are these certain groups, these certain tribal and clan units that we've been referring to as the giant clans, because that's how the Bible refers to them. And we're going to see them referred to that here in this chapter, as a matter of fact. These clans are out there within the general realm of Canaan, and God said those groups need to be wiped out. The regular run-of-the-mill Canaanites are not to be wiped out. So there's this distinction. So the people going to spy out the land also need to see, where are these groups? Do these groups possess cities? In some cases they do. Are these groups living nomadically on the land somewhere between cities? Where are they, so that we know those are the groups that are being treated differently than the others, right? Because in the book of Joshua, which will be another Bible study, but we'll get around to the life of Joshua probably eventually. God is going to take very seriously both the need to stop the abominable practices of those particular clans and not let them continue, but also that Israel is not going to be allowed to treat the other Canaanite groups in that same way. Right? There are very strict rules of warfare that the Israelites need to follow in opposition to those other groups. Right? So chapter 13, verse 3. So Moses sent them from the desert of Paran at the Lord's voice, and all the men were rulers of the children of Israel. Now these were their names: from the tribe of Reuben, Shemua the son of Zakur; from the tribe of Simeon, Shaphat the son of Hori; from the tribe of Judah, Caleb the son of Jephunneh; from the tribe of Issachar, Igal the son of Joseph; from the tribe of Ephraim, Hoshea the son of Nun; from the tribe of Benjamin, Palti the son of Raphu; from the tribe of Zebulun, Gadiel the son of Sodi; from the tribe of Joseph, that is from the tribe of Manasseh, Gadi the son of Susi; from the tribe of Dan, Amiel the son of Gamali; from the tribe of Asher, Sether the son of Michael; from the tribe of Naphtali, Nabi the son of Vothel; from the tribe of Gad, Gruel the son of Maki. These are the names of the men Moses sent to spy out the land. Now Moses called Hoshea the son of Nun Joshua. Okay. So Hoshea, by the way, basically means salvation, whereas Joshua or Yahushua means Yahweh saves, right? So it's just Moses changes his name and adds the name of God to it. And we've already seen Joshua. Remember, Joshua went most of the way up Mount Sinai with Moses. He's been kind of Moses's apprentice almost. We've seen him go into the tent of meeting with Moses. So Moses is, one of the things that stinks about the contemporary world is I have to find a word other than grooming, because that's come to mean something totally different. Moses has been teaching and instructing Joshua to prepare for the fact that when Moses dies, he's planning to make Joshua his replacement. And we'll see that happen when we get to the very end of the life of Moses in this Bible study. But part of that has been this change in his name, that he's assigned this special role. Another thing worth noting is that Caleb here, the son of Jephunneh, we're going to see more of him. There are some things we're going to learn about him that we're not necessarily going to learn here during the life of Moses. They're going to come out in the book of Joshua. But you notice here that he's listed as one of the leaders, one of the elders of the tribe of Judah. And this is further proof of what we were just saying about ethnicity and Israel, in that we're going to find out Caleb is actually a Canaanite. He's one of the Kenizzites, which is one of the Canaanite groups, not one of the Canaanite groups they're supposed to wipe out, one of the other Canaanite groups, but he's still a Canaanite. Right? So we need to understand that when the Bible talks about the tribe of Judah being descended from the person Judah, right? That doesn't mean that in the ancestry.com sense, right? That doesn't mean literal biological descent, because Judah is a tribal unit, right? That's made up of clans, that's made up of extended families. And being part of a tribal unit, being part of a people group in the ancient world, was not based on DNA that they didn't know existed, or even parentage, which they couldn't prove past living memory, right? It was based on the ritual life of that tribal unit or of that people group, right? So what made you an Israelite, according to, we haven't read all of it, but according to what's already come before here in the Torah and the Pentateuch, what made you an Israelite is that you were circumcised, that you ate the Passover, that you worshiped the God of Israel, right? You're an Israelite. Doesn't matter who your parents were, doesn't matter what color your skin is, doesn't matter where you were born, you're an Israelite. You are a son of Israel. You are a descendant of Israel. And if you're a descendant of Israel, you're part of one of the tribes, right? And in this case, Caleb has been sort of adopted into Judah, right? But that adoption didn't give you a second-class status, as we could see by the fact that he's one of the elders. He's one of the leaders. He is just as much a son of Judah as any of the other leaders, even if those other leaders, in terms of ancestry.com, were literally descended from the person Judah. He is just as much a Judahite, right, as they are. And this is important to understand on the Israel side, because it's important to understand on the other side with those people groups we were just talking about, right? The Jebusites, the Girgasites, the Hivites, right? The ones who Israel is supposed to get rid of. That doesn't necessarily mean they have to exterminate every single person, right? Any of those people who leave aside the rituals, the abominations that those tribes are committing, and goes and joins another group, they don't have to join Israel even. They could just go become a Kenizzite like Caleb was, right? But leave off the rituals involving human sacrifice and other demonic rituals that those groups are doing. They don't need to be killed, right? The people who are going to be killed by the Israelites are going to be the people who refuse to leave off doing those things, and the leaders who are leading in those things, right? Like the kings, the tribal chiefs of those groups, who are the ones perpetuating and leading these abominations. Okay. But so what people group you're part of was determined ritually. And the ritual life of the community formed familial bonds. You're now part of a family. And those two things weren't separate. This is why very early, if you read the book of Acts, very early in the book of Acts, the people in the church start using family terms for each other. The members of the different churches that St. Paul visits start being referred to as the brethren at this place, right? The brothers and sisters, right, at this place. And St. Paul talks about how he's like a father to the church in Corinth, right? And these are people who, some of them are Jewish, some of them are not. The ones who are not, some of them are Greeks, some of them are Romans, some of them are Scythians, some of them, right? They're all from different groups, but now they're family, right? Now they're family together. And that's not a new weird thing in the New Testament, right? That's an extension of how God's people, Israel, has always worked. Okay. So Moses gets these 12 leaders from the 12 tribes, including as one of them Joshua, right? Who he's training for leadership, and they're going to be sent to gather the information that we were talking about. Verse 17. Then Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, "Go up to this desert and go up to the mountain, and you will see the land and the people who dwell upon it. What are they? Are they strong or weak, few or many? Also, what is the land they dwell in? Is it good or bad? Then, too, what about the cities they inhabit? Are they walled or unwalled? Then again, what about the ground? Is it fertile or neglected? Are there trees on it? Persevere, and you shall receive some of the fruit of the land." Now the days were the days of spring, the forerunner of the grapes. Okay. So it's the beginning of spring, which is sort of an ideal time to do this, right? For them to go and do this, because now's a good time to see how fertile the land is. Now's a good time to see whether if the trees are budding, the trees are healthy and fruitful, or you can find out if the trees are all dead, right? Have people been cultivating things? Have people been working the land? Have things fallen into disrepair? And probably that was true or untrue in different parts, right? I'm sure there were cities where they found farmland that was being well worked and cultivated, and other places where things were falling apart, right? Where the land was uncultivated and in disrepair and that kind of thing. But all that is information they need to know as they strategize to go into the land. So they went up and spied out the land from the desert of Zin as far as Rehob, near the entrance of Hamat. Then they went up through the desert and came to Hebron, Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai. The descendants of Anak were there. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. Then they came to the valley of Eshcol and surveyed it, and cut down a branch there with one cluster of grapes. They carried between two of them on a pole. They also brought some of the pomegranates and figs. The place was called the Valley of Eshcol because of the cluster the sons of Israel cut down there. So Eshcol is grapes in Hebrew. So they go And here's a number of things they find. They find that this is the beginning of spring. There's fruit all over the place. They gather some of it, so they see that the land is good, that at least a lot of it is being cultivated. They also see these folks, the sons of Anak, right? What it literally says is the Anakim. This is both one of the giant clans, and it is a term that is sometimes used to refer to all of the giant clans. Right. So what do I mean by that? Well, Anak is a person in a genealogy in Genesis, right? So the sons of Anak, there's a literal group that considers itself to be descended from Anak, right? A particular tribe. But also in the book of Joshua, for example, when you get to the end, it'll list that group of names that are referred to a few of the Girgazites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, etc., right? The groups they're supposed to take out. It'll say all of these were removed from the land at the end of Joshua, and therefore none of the Anakim remained, right? None of the sons of Anak remained. So it's also used as kind of a general term to refer to all of them, right? And here it's probably the same thing. Here, this reference to the sons of Anak is just a reference to they found where those giant clans are. They're there. They found where they are, right? And these are groups, as I mentioned, and this is made explicit in several places. One place that's very explicit, maybe overly explicit, is the Book of Wisdom in referring to this. But these are groups that there are particular sexual rituals they're doing that involve demonic possession, and they're doing human sacrifices which involve cannibalism. These are the two main abominations they're committing, and they're part of their ritual lives. This is part of what constitutes who they are, right? As the sons of Anak. And the human sacrifices are people who they're capturing, people from other tribes, from other groups who they capture in war. So these are particularly warlike tribes and groups. And based on their bloodthirstiness and violence, obviously, rather intimidating, as we're going to see here in a minute. But this is also why, so at the end of the book of Joshua, it's going to say, you know, they're all removed from the land, but it's going to talk about some stragglers of the Anakim who made their way into the Philistine territory. And if you go all the way back to the very early days of this Bible study, when we were doing the life of David, we got to Goliath. Goliath was one of those stragglers. So the members of those groups basically became mercenaries for the most part, working for the Philistines. And you can understand why the Philistines, being pagans, etc., would want to or might want to have those sort of bloodthirsty, violent individuals as mercenaries and frontline fighters working for them, the various Philistine kings. Verse 25. Then they returned from spying out the land after 40 days. Now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the children of Israel in the desert of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Okay. So first to comment on 40 days. This is review because we've talked about this before, I know, but in both Hebrew and Greek, as we've commented before when dealing with numbers, there aren't numerals. So you convey numbers with letters. And when you convey numbers with letters, it becomes imprecise. And a lot of numbers are rounded. We've talked about this before. And so this is why you get, in some places you'll see 70, and in some places you'll see 72. And we being modern people are like, well, which is it, 70 or 72, right? Whereas they would probably say, well, there's probably 72, but 70, right? Like it's sort of close enough, right? 7 10s, right? Like, or maybe, 6 12s, right? Like, so the same is true with 40, right? 40 is the rounded version of 42. And 42 is made up of 6 sevens, 6 sets of 7. And the idea is, since 7 was understood numerically to represent completion, like a whole week, right? 7 represents completion. That if you have 6 sevens, this would naturally cause you to expect, okay, now there's going to be a 7th 7, right? There's going to be a final sort of completion of this. So when you go through the scriptures, and there are lots of places where things happen for 40 days and 40 nights, or 40 years, or 40, 40, 40. But what unites them all together, including here, is that when you see a period of 40 days and or nights, that is a time period that represents preparation. Is preparation for something that is going to come next after that time period ends. So Christ is tempted and fasts for 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness, and then begins his public ministry. Right. Moses was on Mount Sinai, at the top of Mount Sinai with God for 40 days. And then he comes down to give the Torah, and on and on. And here, right, they go and spy out the land for 40 days. They're preparing to go in. We're going to see another 40 here, not too long, because there's going to be some more preparation required. But that's what's going on with the 40. But so after the 40 days, after this preparatory period, they come back, they bring all of this fruit of the land, they set it before the Israelites for them to see, and now they're going to give their report. Then they told him, that being Moses, and said, we went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Okay, so far so good, right? It's as wonderful as God told us it was. Look at this fruit we brought back. It's great. Verse 28, nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land toward the south. The Hittites, the Evites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan. Okay. So the main report, this is the majority report, right, that comes back. The majority report is, yes, it's as beautiful, as wonderful as God told us, but the cities are really fortified, and we're not exactly an army. We don't even really have weapons. We're a bunch of escaped slaves who've been wandering in the desert. And the place is full of those bloodthirsty giant clans. And they're spread out all over. It's not like we can avoid them. Right. Implication being, I don't know if this is such a great idea, Moses. Right? Maybe we should, find someplace else to settle with nobody there, or maybe somebody we can push around a little easier. Then Caleb quieted the people towards Moses and said to him, no, but let us go up at once and take possession of it, for we are well able to overcome them. Okay. So Caleb here is giving part of the minority report, right? So Caleb says, okay, technically true, right? What they just said, not untrue. Those are facts. But we need to go right now. We can do this. right? And Caleb is saying this not because he's crazy, not because he's a cowboy, right? But he remembers how that report started, which is this land is just like God told us it would be. God, the one who brought us out of Egypt and wrecked the Egyptians on our behalf. Well, if he wrecked the Egyptians, he can handle these guys, right? We need to just go do it. So don't be scared by that stuff that those guys are saying. Verse 31, but the men who went up with him said, we are not going up, for we are unable to go up against them, because they are stronger than we. Okay, so the other guys, other than Caleb and Joshua, the other 10 are like, yeah, you have fun with that, right? Like, as for us and our tribes, our clans, we're not going up there, right? Because we're going to get destroyed. We can't stand up against them. And so we're out. So they instilled a terror for the land which they spied out among the children of Israel, saying, the land through which we went as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants, and we seemed like grasshoppers to them, but so we actually were. And so the word there that's translated giants is Nephilim, that we talked about. We've talked about a few times this Bible study in the past, but it means giants, right? So they're saying they not only give this report and their opinion to Moses, but they then go out among all the people and are saying, no, there's no way, right? We're going to get wiped out completely if we try to move into that land. Forget about it. So they're actively sowing discord, right? They're actively making the people afraid, actively talking them out of following Moses and what God has promised. Chapter 14, verse 1. Now all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. All the children of Israel were murmuring against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, would we had died in the land of Egypt or in this desert? Why did the Lord bring us to this land to fall in war? Our wives and children shall be plundered. It is better for us to return to Egypt. So they said to one another, let us select a ruler and return to Egypt. Okay, so here's the old song again, right? That we've been singing over and over again. Why did God bring us? And they don't understand the irony of their question. Why did God bring us out of Egypt? So he defeated the Egyptians, did the plagues, the whole shebang, right? Parting of the Red Sea. Defeated the Amalekites at Mount Sinai, who are one of these groups, right? That they've already defeated. God has already defeated before them. Why did God do all these things for us and bring us here and feed us? And why did he do all this? Just to let us die in battle. Well, there's another way of reading that. Like, God did all this. Maybe he's not going to let you die in battle. Right? Maybe he's going to see this thing through, but that apparently is not in their thinking. Right? That apparently is not in their thinking. And it's easy for us to be very judgmental of them about that. But this is a move that we do all the time. Right? We're facing some challenge, some problem, some crisis. Very rarely do we think back and say, well, God's gotten me through this and this and this and this in my life, right? He'll get me through this too, right? We very rarely do that. Far more often, it's like a new day has dawned and woe is me. Why is this happening to me, right? Why am I having to go through this? Why me? Why is it always me? Everyone else has it great, but me, right? So this is very human. It's something we're all prone to. But here we can kind of see the absurdity of it. That they talk about all the things God has already done for them and then say, oh, and now he's just going to let us die. Right? That doesn't make any sense, right? Um, and so they say, we had it better in Egypt, so let's just go back. Right? Let's pick somebody else instead of Moses to take charge, and let's just go back to Egypt and call it a day, because this is going to be a disaster. Verse 5, then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the congregation of the children of Israel. But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who spied out the land, tore their clothes. And they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, the land we passed through to spy out is an extremely good land. Since the Lord chooses us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. But do not apostatize from the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our food. Their time is come and gone, but the Lord is with us. Okay. So Moses and Aaron fall down before them. The idea there is that Moses and Aaron are kind of trying to plead with them, like, please, not again, right? Like, right? But Joshua and Caleb try to reason with them, right? Try to rally them, talk some sense, right? And they're so upset at this, the tearing of their clothes. This happens. I think we talked about this way back again with David, in the life of David. But the tearing of the clothes sort of represents sort of extreme frustration and grief, right, at what's happening. And so they tear their clothes and they say, right, sure, right, they're there, but this is the beautiful land God promised us. And as they say, the people there are going to be food for us, they don't mean they're going to be cannibals. This is in contrast to what the other spies said, which is, this is a land that devours people, right? They're saying, we're not going to get devoured. We're going to devour them, right? We're going to go in there and we're going to win, right? Don't apostatize. So the word apostatize, that's the verb. An apostate is someone who does that, right? The word is a transliteration of a Greek word that literally means to sort of fall back or abandon your post, right? The opposite of that, and St. Paul uses these words in 2 Thessalonians, is translated as to stand firm, right? So if you're given a post, you're given a calling, you're put somewhere, you're given a job, you're given a mission, you're supposed to stand firm, right? Hold your post. Things are going to happen that might scare you. Things are going to happen that might deter you, but you stand firm, right? The opposite of that is to fall away, to abandon your post, to drop back, to retreat. Okay, and that's to apostatize, right? And it tells us something. The fact that apostate is primarily used within Christianity to refer to someone who leaves Christianity, that tells us something about how ancient Christians understood Christianity. That they understood Christianity as this calling, but as the New Testament is constantly talking about it, almost in military terms, right? Of the fact that, yes, we're called to something. We're given a post. We're given a role to play by God. We're called to do certain things. And in the midst of us trying to do that, trying to be faithful to that calling and trying to stand at our post faithfully, there are going to be things that come along that are going to scare us. There are things that are going to come along that are going to deter us. They're going to make us want to retreat. They're going to make us think maybe we should just abandon our posts. They're going to make us doubt, right? But that we're called to stand firm, to maintain, right? To continue on. And to step away from the Christian faith is fundamentally to abandon one's post, right? Is the idea there. And so Joshua and Caleb plead with them, right? Not to do that, and try to rally them to say, we can do this because God is with us. He's promised us this. Look at everything he already brought us through. We're going to go in and take the land, and it's going to be wonderful. And we're going to have this beautiful land rich with milk and honey and the fruits that you saw. Verse 10, then all the congregation said to stone them with stones. Now the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud upon the tabernacle of testimony before all the children of Israel. So they respond to Joshua and Caleb's rousing speech by picking up rocks to kill them and to kill Moses and to kill Aaron. And the way this is presented pretty dramatically here in the text. They're all picking up rocks. They're getting ready to murder Moses and Aaron and Joshua and Caleb. And all of a sudden, that huge glowing cloud, that huge fiery cloud that they've been following, appears over the tabernacle, right? Lights up around the tabernacle. God shows up, right? God shows up at just this moment when they're getting ready to kill them. Verse 11, then the Lord said to Moses, how long will these people provoke me? How long will they not believe me with all the signs I performed among them? I will strike them with death and destroy them, and I will make you and your father's house into a great and more numerous nation than this one. Okay, so we've seen this before. God has said this to Moses before, right? You know, how long am I expected, right, to continue to deal with this, to continue to be patient with them, to continue to suffer this just outright rebellion, right? And he again says to Moses, this has been the option he's offered to Moses over and over again, right? I'll judge them. I'll get rid of them. We'll cut them off. And just like I started with Abraham, I'll start over with you, Moses. And I'll make your descendants, Moses, a great nation, and I'll bring them into the land and give it to them. Right? And as we've talked about before, a lesser man than Moses having to deal with this over and over again. And when I say deal with this, I don't just mean, oh man, all these people have all these problems. They're always bickering. I got to do all this, right? I mean, there's that all the time, as we've seen. But people attempting to murder him, people being ready to kill him. Okay? These people are ready again to kill him. And a lesser man, that would be a real tempting option. To just be like, yeah, you're right. I'm done with these people too. Right? Let's start over. I'll try to do a better job with my kids than their parents did with their kids, right? But we'll see once again how Moses responds. Then Moses said to the Lord, but the Egyptians will hear it. For by your might you brought these people up from among them. And all the inhabitants of this land heard that you are the Lord among these people, who is seen plainly with the eyes, O Lord. And your cloud stands upon them, and you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and in a pillar of fire by night. Now you would wipe out this people as one man, and the nations that heard your name will speak, saying, because the Lord was not able to bring this people into the land which he swore to give them, therefore he spread them out in the desert. Okay. So Moses not only doesn't take that offer, not only intercedes for people who are ready to murder him, right, but is actually sort of trying to make an argument with God as to why he shouldn't, right? And what is that argument? You kill them out here in the desert, the Egyptians will hear about it. Remember those Egyptians? And all the people who heard about what you did in Egypt. And you've appeared and been seen among us. Everybody knows that you're associated with this people. So if this people dies in the desert, what are all these other nations going to say? Some of them might say, oh, this God wasn't powerful enough to defeat the Canaanites. And so he just let them die in the desert. You can't have that, right? Now, there's a surface reading of this where someone would say, okay, well, this is treating God like he's really petty, right? Like, oh, God, you don't embarrass yourself, right? Like God has to care what people think about him or something. That's not really what Moses is after. Because we saw back during the plagues on Egypt and during the Passover and during the Exodus proper, we saw that over and over again, God talked about not just revealing himself to the Israelites, but revealing himself to the Egyptians. God has made it very clear so far in the Torah or in the Pentateuch that he's chosen Israel not because he loves Israel and hates all the other nations, or loves Israel and doesn't care about any of the other nations, right? He's created Israel to be the instrument through which he brings love and salvation to the rest of the nations, right? So Moses understands this best of all. And so Moses knows that God's goal is not just, oh, I'm going to create this nation, I'm going to give them some land in the Levant. Right? He knows that's not the goal. That's not the end goal. That's this little piece. That's this little step here that we're in. But he knows what the real goal is. And so what he's doing here in talking to God is he's pointing to the real goal. He's pointing to that real goal, and he's saying, not just that's your goal, God, but that's our goal. He's expressing that he's on the same page, right? That he understands what God is doing and that he's on board with that. And if he understands it and he's on board with that, and he's able to put aside whatever feelings he's having based on these people trying to murder him again, then surely God can too, in pursuit of that bigger goal, right? And again, as we've talked about before, when we see these passages, this is not an instance where God was planning to wipe them all out and then Moses changes his mind, right? God knows everything that's going to happen, right? He knows exactly how this conversation with Moses is going to play out. And so he has this dialogue with Moses for Moses' sake, right? Because by Moses going through this process of making this speech, of interceding for them, of expressing, what has he expressed? He's expressed that he's on board with God's plan. He's expressed at some level forgiveness, or at least patience and long suffering with these people who hate him and want to kill him, right? He's vocalized that. So this is a process that's transformative of Moses. This is part of Moses finding salvation, of Moses being shaped more and more in the likeness of God himself, right? Of Moses becoming like God and finding salvation. Because to be like God, he has to be patient and long-suffering the way God is. He has to be forgiving the way God is, right? And you really become that when the rubber meets the road. You don't become patient and long-suffering by not having that tested. You don't become forgiving by not having anyone ever wrong you. And so this is part of the process of Moses finding that salvation. So then he continues and concludes his argument. Verse 17, now then let your strength, O Lord, be exalted in the manner you spoke, saying, the Lord is long-suffering and abundant in mercy and truth, taking away lawlessness, wrongdoings, and sins. But he would not cleanse the guilty by repaying the sins of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation. Remit the sin of this people according to your great mercy, as you are merciful to them from Egypt even until now. Okay. So notice again how Moses phrases this. He says, let your strength be exalted. Because here's something Moses now understands. Right? To be long-suffering and patient requires strength. To forgive someone requires strength. Okay? We often associate these things with the opposite. Somebody who doesn't quote unquote stand up for themselves, somebody who doesn't try to get revenge, somebody who doesn't hit back, right? Whether it's verbally hit back or physically hit back, right? That person is a doormat, right? That person is weak, right? Or they would do these things. Moses understands the opposite. Moses understands it takes real strength to, as Christ will later say, turn the other cheek, right? It takes real strength to find it in yourself to forgive someone who's wronged you rather than taking revenge, right? This requires more strength, right? And he's saying, who has more strength than God? Who is mightier than God? Therefore, God can certainly have mercy, can certainly forgive, can certainly be patient with these people, right? With these wicked people. But notice he's not asking God to forgive in the sense of just like, oh, come on, just keep letting it slide. Because remember what God's first question was, how long do I have to deal with this, right? He's not saying just give them a little more time. He's not saying, right, bear with one more. I'm sure this is the last one, because he's sure this is not the last one. Moses isn't stupid. What he asks God to do in forgiving them is to take their sin away, to cleanse them, to purify them, to heal them, right? He's asking God to save them, to transform their lives so they're not the way they are anymore. Because he knows the only way these people who keep doing this, these rebellious people, these stubborn people, these forgetful people of the blessings that God has given to them, the only way they're going to change is if God changes them. The only way they're going to change is if God works in them to help them change. That's what Moses is asking God to do. That's the action Moses is asking God to take toward these people who don't deserve it, as Moses acknowledges. Verse 20, again, the Lord said to Moses, I am merciful to them according to your word, but truly as I live and my name lives, and all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord. Assuredly, all the men who are seeing my glory and signs which I did in Egypt and in this desert, and put me to the test now these 10 times, and did not heed my voice, they certainly shall not see the land I swore to their fathers, but their children who are here with me, and do not know good nor evil, every inexperienced youngster, to these I shall give the land. However, all those who provoked me shall not see it. Okay. So we'll pause there, right? So God says he will forgive them, right? As Moses asks. He will be patient, long-suffering with them. But there is a consequence for this, because this is one too many times, right? The consequence of this is this generation, the ones who are adults now, are not going to get to go into and possess the land, right? Because they just said it was impossible. They just said it wasn't worth it to them. They just said they weren't willing to trust God to do it. So, okay, they won't receive it. God isn't going to give it to them because they don't want to cooperate and receive it. He says, but he will give it to their children, right? The children who are there now, the children who are going to be born subsequently, they will be the ones to receive. Okay. Now, we tend to look at this as, oh, this is this horribly harsh punishment. Okay? This is this horribly harsh punishment. They're all going to die in the desert. They're not going to get to go into the land. But a couple things to take into account. Number one, compared to killing them all right there at that moment, that's a lot of mercy, number one. Because during the next, we're going to see how this works. It's going to be that they're going to spend 40 years wandering until all of that generation is dead. Um, during that 40 years, God is going to feed them. He's going to protect them. He's going to care for them, right? Throughout their lives. They're just not going to get the very material benefits and material blessings that he would have given them otherwise, right? If they had acted differently, right? That's why I say this is a consequence, not a punishment. But even more so, we have to understand how people viewed their children. We very sadly, one of the ways in which our modern American culture is unique, there's at least one generation of people, I'm not going to be too aggressive about this, but there's at least one, maybe two generations of people in broader American culture who, for whatever reason, don't feel the need to try to see that their children have better lives than they did, who are kind of focused on themselves and, their kids can fend for themselves, which is a very different attitude than parents of children have taken throughout human history. But in the ancient world, especially, your children were your legacy in the world. There was not a parent there, right? Even among these grumblers, even among the rebellious, evil, wicked Israelites, there was not a one of them who wouldn't have died so that their child could live. Right? Who, if they were given the option, right, I can give this to you or I could give this to your child. You could prosper in your life or your child could prosper in their life, who wouldn't have chosen their child. So even in the midst of this consequence, even where God is taking away a blessing that they didn't deserve anyway, but God is taking it away from them. Even in the midst of that, he gives them this incredible hope that, but your children will. Your children will see it. So God is here, in terms of how the original hearers would read and hear this, being unbelievably merciful, unspeakably merciful to these people. And in the process, right, Moses is again sort of being formed and shaped. We're going to see a certain consequence, though, that befalls Moses too before we're done with his life, but that's for a later Bible study. Verse 24, now my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit in him and followed me fully, I will bring him into the land where he went, and his seed shall inherit it. Now the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwell in the valley. Tomorrow turn and depart for the desert by way of the Red Sea. So Caleb, and we're going to see also Joshua, who were different, who put their trust in God, who believed in his promises, who were faithful, who tried to steer everybody back in the right direction, right? They're the two who are accepted from this consequence. They're going to, albeit as old men, they'll be elderly men when they do it, but as old men, they're going to get to see it. They're going to get to enter into the land, right? And you might say, well, that's not much. I mean, they're going to be super old. They're not going to get to enjoy it for very long. No, but again, their children are, and their children's children are. And they're going to get to see their children and their children's children settle in the land before they die. Right? So there's some more to this story, but time-wise, I think this is the place where we need to end. So we'll come back and pick up here next month. Michael may be able to tell us which date that is.
Yes, I can.
In
That
terms
would
of the
be,
third Thursday.
it is the third Thursday, Father Stephen. That actually is the week before Thanksgiving. So that's good news because we
Yeah.
won't have to worry about bringing our turkey to the Bible study. Although you'd probably be eating turkey instead of the Bible study, I would assume. But that would be the 21st of November. Are you free that Thursday?
I should be.
Okay, so our next Bible study will be the 21st of November. And before we end, I'll just open it up and see if there are any questions. If anyone would like to put their question in chat, feel free to do that, and I can read that out loud if you prefer, or just come off mute or virtually raise your hand. And I'm sure Father Stephen would be Happy to answer any questions if there are any.
In the chat right now, there's a sad list of people who left.
Oh, that's never fun.
Yeah. We can say, just say they all apostatized. That's
Any questions for Father Stephen? Going once. Quiet group tonight.
yeah.
Going twice.
Doesn't have to be related to what we just read. AMA, ask me anything. Now's your chance.
Well, I thought it was interesting that you dropped a little bit of a possible spoiler we might get to Joshua, so I'm excited about that. I also wanted to mention, if there are no questions, Father Stephen has a brand new book that just came out. When was that? 2 weeks ago, I think it was.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, so I know our local parish's bookstore did get that in. And I know that book has been a long time coming, and thank God it's thicker than I was hoping. So that'll be even more.
It is the physically largest of my books.
I'm just going to give you a little bit of a plug here, Father, so I'll share my screen. If you don't know what the book is called, it is called St. Paul the Pharisee, Jewish Apostle to All Nations. You can get it on Ancient Faith Store. You can also probably get it on Amazon.
Not yet. Amazon doesn't have them in stock yet.
Okay, so Ancient Faith Store is your only bet right now, but
it's your best bet. Amazon will get it to you eventually, but
that was the wrong book. If you go to Ancient Faith Store and look at their rotating banner on the homepage, you can click on that and pick up Father Stephen's new book, St. Paul the Pharisee, Jewish Apostle to the Nations. I'm definitely looking forward to reading that, and I know many, if not all of us on the Bible study are as well. And who knows, we might have a Antiochian Men book club discussion about this book in the future. We will see. That might be a little tease too.
And as to the
audio,
yeah, that's going to be coming sometime next month. So there's process. Once you get it done, edited and everything, it has to, you send it to Audible and then they have to quality check and do all this stuff before it gets actually posted. So sometime in November.
Okay.
Depending on how long that process takes, it will be.
And is it available in Kindle?
Yeah, you can get it, the ebook from them. You can also get the ebook through Ancient Faith. It's cheaper if you go through Ancient Faith. I think it's $9.99 on Amazon. And if you go to Ancient Faith and click on the ebook thing, it takes you to a site called Orthodox Christian eBooks. And they have it for $8.99. So you save a whole American dollar.
Hey man, with inflation, that dollar, it's critical.
And then you could download the file and send it to your Kindle and it'll work just as well.
Excellent. So until that audiobook comes out, can we just call you up and have you read us the book over the phone?
Select portions. I'm not going to throw that open to everybody.
No, that wouldn't be fair. All right. Are there any questions other than about the audiobook or the Kindle of his new book for Father Steve?
Yes, I actually had a question. It took me a little bit to fumble with the microphone to get it working. So if I may ask a question.
Yes, sir.
Alrighty. So my question is actually, it kind of stems from, it initiated during the episode of Lord of Spirits. I believe it might have been 3 or 4 episodes ago where we were talking about characteristics of God, essentially, that are kind of misunderstood, at least, like in this modern culture. And then specifically, I had an example in mind, and we actually kind of got to today in relationship to the interactions that Moses has with God, and specifically what seems to be able to actually affect God and to change him, essentially, to change his mind, essentially. So, and I wanted to kind of see, not necessarily, like a gotcha moment, like aha, but how are we to understand kind of the sequence of moments where, on one hand, we do know that God isn't affected or changed by something external, or it's like one day it's this, then it's something else. But ultimately, we have, starting with Abraham and then Moses, and then ultimately we have the example of Christ saying, knock and it will be open, like perpetuate, and kind of move forward in order to actually, then affect God. So I kind of wanted to see how are we to reconcile those two, what at least in the face, kind of opposing ideas.
Right. Well, so this is basically an image of prayer, right? Anytime we pray. And we don't pray to affect or change God. Right? I don't think any of us really thinks that, right? In the sense that, like, we don't think, well, if I could just get enough people praying. I mean, they have stuff like that on Facebook, right? But like, we could just get 1,000 people to pray that God will have to do what we want or something. Or the right person to pray or this or that, right? So, for example, we pray for God to heal someone, right? But we don't believe that, like, well, if I didn't pray, they wouldn't have been healed. Like, we're taking credit for it. Right.
Yeah.
God is at work in the word. God will, as he says to Moses, I'll show mercy on whom I will show mercy. Right. And so God will heal whom he will heal. But God gives us the privilege of being a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So God sometimes chooses to heal people through our prayers. Right. He uses that as the instrument through which he heals people. Or he will, anytime God does anything through us, right? God can send anyone he wants, any message he wants, anytime he wants, right? He has a legion of angels, right? He has saints who can appear to them. He can get anyone a message. But sometimes God gives us the privilege of putting us in a place at a time where we can say to a person what God needs them to hear, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when we are that person, just like with Moses here, right? It's not that we got God to do something like magic, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's we're transformed and we're changed by it, right? So if God puts me in a position to pray for someone and I don't pray for them, God can still heal them, right? If God has decided to heal them, but I won't have any part of that. I've cut myself off from that. So if we ask the what if question, like, what if Moses had just been really surly that day? Right? Now, God knew he wasn't, right? So God knows all of this going into it, right? But if he had been, if he'd said, no, you're right, God, wipe them all out. I'm sick of these people, right? We shouldn't imagine that God would have wiped them all out, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
That's like he was waiting for Moses to tell him what to do, right?
Okay.
But God would have shown mercy, and maybe, for example, Moses would have been included with the rebellious people.
Mm-hmm.
Right,
so
with his attitude. So the idea is God approaches Moses and has this dialogue with him, right? Because this gives Moses the chance to express certain thoughts and feelings, to express forgiveness, to understand. The place where we talked about this a lot at length in this Bible study, if you go back and watch the episode from the life of Abraham, where we talked about the sacrifice of Isaac,
mm-hmm.
right? Why does God have Abraham go and do this and get ready to kill him if he knows he's going to tell him not to? Right?
Okay.
Why put him through this? Right? And the idea is, right, he never wanted Isaac dead, right? Obviously, right? But he wanted Abraham to learn and to understand something.
Okay.
And we don't really, we like to think, oh, you just have to tell me something once and then I will learn and understand it. But that's not really how humans work.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We have to live with things and live through things and, right, experience things before we really understand them.
So if I can ask a follow-up. So
Yeah.
let's say in the context, let's say, of somebody who's a pagan, which again, I'm not don't plan on being one, but but in that context, did they see themselves as actually affecting their gods by the ritual and engagement that they had, or was it similar where they kind of put themselves as, essentially a receptacle, to be interacted by that god with? Yeah. And then, ultimately something will happen, like whether it's something they're trying to, like you said, like it's not as if we're trying to perform magic, whenever we engage in prayer. Yeah. But let's, in the opposite context, because again, I'm not familiar necessarily with, like how pagans thought necessarily. Did they see themselves as actually affecting their gods, or, again, in a similar lane where they're mostly just offering themselves as kind of like a neutral instrument?
Right. No, they thought they could affect their gods.
Oh,
And they were in many cases literally trying to do magic.
okay. I see. I see.
Right. They believed that if you had first invoked certain names of certain beings, you could control them and get them to do what you wanted on the magic side.
Mhm.
And on the side of, their gods, even like if you read the Iliad, Homer's Iliad,
Mhm.
right? The gods sort of switch sides in the war back and forth based on who's offering them sacrifices and
Mhm.
who's making promises to them and stuff. Right? Like they're sort of wishy-washy and could be convinced to go back and forth and all this. It have to be, they could be convinced and cajoled.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you for it.
All right. Any other last questions before we call it a night?
Hello, I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, hello everyone. I'm Alan, baptized as Basil, all the way from South Africa. Long-time listener, and great opportunity to be live with you guys. Hope you guys are doing well in the United States. Brother Stephen, I just wanted to ask. I heard someone saying about. I'm not. So this is a bit milky. So something that startled me. That Ezra had put together one of the 5 books. I'm not sure which one. After he came back from captivity, and when he had rewritten his book, he didn't put it in chronicle order. I don't know if it was Deuteronomy or Numbers. It's the one with Nahab and Nabiah, the two who
Leviticus. That's Leviticus. Yeah.
Yes. Was that true, or is it something that I don't know if it's different scholars have different views on that?
Yeah. So there is a text called Fourth Ezra that was written during the period between the end of the exile and the birth of Christ. It was probably written sometime in the 3rd century BC, so the 200s BC. And in 4th Ezra, there is what happens is during the exile, when the Babylonians took the Jewish people into exile, they destroyed the Torah. They burned all the copies. And so 4th Ezra describes how Ezra, as a prophet, he's sitting under a tree and he sort of goes into a trance and rewrites the Torah and reproduces it sort of exactly as it was and restores it. And this both reflects and is part of then a Jewish tradition. And so you see certain church fathers like St. Jerome at one point, in his introduction to his Latin translation of the Pentateuch, St. Jerome makes an offhand comment of, well, whether you think what we have is what Moses wrote or whether you think Ezra restored it. So he was sort of familiar with that tradition, but he doesn't say that that tradition is true. He says like, well, that could be true or not, right? And 4th Ezra is not in most Bibles. It is in an appendix to the Slavonic Bible. So if you get a Russian Bible or a Serbian Bible, it is in an appendix, which means it's not sort of really part of the Old Testament, but it's sort of nearby. And then once you have that tradition of Ezra restoring it, there are then a lot of people among the people who believe that Ezra restored it, which is a minority group. Within that minority group, some of them believe that when Ezra restored it, he made certain changes for certain reasons, right? Not that he got it wrong, but that it's sort of structured structured differently. And usually it's related to where chapter 16 is in the book. That's one of them in Leviticus, is that chapter 16 was moved in the book for particular reasons. So that's not a broadly accepted thing. That's not considered true by the Orthodox Church as a whole. That's not like a teaching of the Orthodox Church. It is a view that's held by a pretty small minority of people in the Orthodox Church, but it's not heretical or anything. It's not bad. The Orthodox Church has never said it's bad, but it's also not sort of endorsed as being true. So it's sort of a theological opinion held by some people.
Yeah. Thank you, Father. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, we've hit 7:30 p.m. Central Time. Thank you, Basil, for joining us all the way from Africa, I think you said. It's probably pretty
South
early in the morning there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's starting to cool off here, probably starting to get warm there.
Yeah. But we'll go ahead and we'll bring this to a close. Thank you again, Father Stephen, for being with us as always. And we will next meet on November 21st at the same time, 6 o'clock p.m. Central Time here in the U.S., 7 o'clock Eastern Time. And until then, have a great evening. And thanks again, everybody, for joining.